Welcome to the Thriving Leadership Academy podcast. I'm Christopher Harding, joined by my business partner and friend, Will Wilkinson. Today we have a special guest with us, Mónica Guzmán, who is a journalist and author of the book, I Never Thought of It That Way, and a popular TEDx speaker whose TEDx talk on how curiosity will save us will be an important part of our conversation today. So grateful that you're with us. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation.
I saw your TED Talk in Reno, love that. And Chris is going through your book. He's loving that. Where are you physically?
I'm in Seattle, which is characteristically rainy and gray today.
What a surprise. I'm shocked.
I had a business in Seattle, a business office there for years, and used to travel there quite a bit for clients. And for some reason, every time I would go there, it'd be sunny. And it started to create a complex. I started to feel pressure to have it be sunny when I showed up.
Yep. You brought the sunshine somehow.
Yeah,
exactly.
Sunshine is coming.
Oh my gosh. What tends to happen here is those of us who've lived here a long time, if it's supposed to be rainy that season, so all of winter and most of fall, but it isn't, if there's a bright sunny day, then it doesn't matter what you're doing, you have to go outside.
Yeah,
you have
exactly.
to. Like I have done stupid things, like just take my lunch, when I worked in a newsroom, and just like walk out on the balcony and just eat my lunch, like standing. I don't care. I need vitamin D to shine on me because it's there. So.
Exactly. Well, that's perfect. Will was talking when we first jumped on here together about, we were just talking about your book and your TED Talk and so on. Then I gathered from what you were saying, you were from Seattle. But I have to tell you, I enjoyed your TED Talk. It was really wonderful. You did a great job. But I'm loving your book. I was telling Will, who's also a writer, that, your ability to both tell stories and tell stories that are absolutely tied in and relevant to the topic you're addressing is a wonderful gift. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad that was impactful. While I was working on the book, I was stuck on how many personal stories to even bring in. And several folks around me said, you can't not include them. So I said, okay, some of them are a little vulnerable, but I'm glad I shared them.
Speaking of that, one of the stories you shared, I think it's fairly early in the book, but you talked about, and I'm going to get this maybe not exactly right, you can give us the details, but it was that a story about your father and how he found himself talking to somebody who had the opposite political persuasion that he did. And he found himself not speaking his truth, but agreeing and kind of going along as if what the other person was saying was his own opinion. And that really touched me for some reason. You had shared enough about your father just, previous to that, to where I thought, I really felt for him.
Yeah. I think he felt for himself. And I think when he was telling me that and sharing that story, he knew there was something uncomfortable about the fact that he let himself do that. He is very different politically from me, which is part of the impetus of my writing the book. I lean liberal, he leans conservative and voted for Trump. So that kind of, there's different levels of conservative and different levels of liberal. So yeah, he told me that story. And it was really impactful for me to hear that my father, someone who doesn't give a crap what other people think of him, could not in that moment, stand against somebody's assumptions of his political beliefs. And in fact, even heard himself say things against Trump, even though he likes the guy. And it was so interesting to hear him confess to that and have it really feel like a confession.
Well, I think it's only gotten more like that today, with real fear of speaking up because of the retaliation that can happen. And I wonder, what your thoughts are on that. What has cultivated this environment where even friends and family, I really appreciate how you spoke about dealing with your family, for one thing, are kind of reluctant to really speak our truth because we get categorized. Oh, he's a Trumper, he's an whatever. The labels go on, and it seems harder and harder to stick on issues and have friendly debates before it gets to mudslinging around personalities and labeling.
Yeah, that's definitely the climate we're in. There's a lot of fear of different things. So fear of being misunderstood, fear of someone taking things personally when you didn't mean them that way, fear of someone changing how they look at you, maybe having a worse opinion of you as a person because of what you believe or the questions you ask, fear of being seen to betray your own side by getting too curious in the wrong direction, fear of losing the connections that you value, whether you're distancing your own family by something you say. Lots of families have come to terms with all this and achieved a sort of détente by saying, well, let's just not talk about politics, which can become a real problem when any member of that family starts to feel like, but this or that issue matters to me deeply. And if we don't talk about it, it's like we're not talking about me and things that matter to me. And after a while, that can fray relationships. So in a lot of situations, that can become untenable. Not to mention, this is America, right? We pride ourselves on freedom of expression, of the free flow of ideas. So we know that there's something kind of broken if the climate of let's just not say what we mean or what we feel or what we believe in good faith, that's not a good place to be for us, and we know that.
No, that's so true. And as you're saying this, I moved recently to Prescott, Arizona, from Oregon, and to the good, fortune of myself and my wife, our friends who we actually moved there to be close to, invited us into a group of friends they had formed, having moved there a year earlier. And what's interesting is every Sunday morning, there's this guy's coffee clutch, if you will. Mm-hmm. And around the table are people of different religions, different political persuasions. Some are atheists, some are devout believers in religion, some, and it's a very interesting thing because somehow this group, prior to me, had cultivated this willingness to listen to each other and to be curious. And so when I saw your TED Talk, I immediately sent it out to all of them and said, this is what we're doing. And I think the heart of what I got, and I'm, rereading your book for the second time and seeing again that such a critical element in this is curiosity. And I want to hear more about that, but I'm also interested to hear how you think we lost what used to be a fundamental part of conversation and relationship.
Yeah. Well, first off, I really like that you mentioned cultivating curiosity, because it is a thing that is cultivated. It's not something some of us come equipped with and others don't. That's not how it works. The research on curiosity as a cognitive ability shows that it's for each person, it's when your attention is drawn to the gap between something you know and something you want to know. You recognize there's a gap, there's a hole there in your knowledge of something that you want. And so when you want to fill that gap, some of us will stop at nothing, you look up hours later from the internet, you're like, where have I even been? You went to this rabbit hole of investigating things. Sometimes it's quite fun. Other times it's actually very unpleasant because there's the gap between what you know and what you want to know. There is no answer yet, but you're looking for it, and it's nothing satisfying you. That's a place of a lot of danger, which gets to your question about how we got to a place where it feels like we've lost curiosity. When we're living in anxious times, uncertainty can be absolutely agonizing. To name a couple examples, when COVID was more raw in our world, I remember the anxiety of, for me, when will the vaccine be available for me? How about my children? And that was something that led me to check the news over and over and over again, right? And for others, it might have been, when will they lift the vaccine mandates? The vaccine mandates from my workplace or the mask mandates from my kids' schools, this seems too much and I don't like it. And so when, right? And people just want the answer. there's also confounding questions. Why do those people believe that horrible thing? And so when we are agonized by that gap between what we know and what we want to know, why do those people believe that horrible thing? One of the things that we do is we manufacture certainty to get rid of the discomfort. So, for example, you might find a thought piece about a group of people who you don't understand and don't particularly like something they're doing. And that thought piece may offer an answer. Oh, those people believe this thing because they're jerks. See, here's the statistics. And you go, oh yeah, they're jerks. That's it. And then you, instead of leaving that question open, okay, this thought piece is arguing that they're jerks. Cool. That's a data point. Probably not the whole story. I'm going to stay curious. No, it becomes a lot easier to tell yourself, I now have my answer. I can move on. And you are getting rid of some agony that way, but you are inviting in a kind of blindness as a result. And so that's what's happened. It's anxious times.
Well, certainly. And we love to invite guests to help our listeners into something actionable. And, I don't think the idea of uncertain, anxious times is going to go away anytime soon. So give us a few strategies that you use and you help clients with and readers for dealing with that. I mean, it's not going away. So what do we do?
Yeah. One thing is to ask yourself a question that you may not want to ask yourself. And that question is, what am I missing? When you catch yourself in judgment, you might be in conversation with someone else. You might be interfacing with a point of view that is so different and confounding and frustrating. But hold on to that question. What am I missing? That question assumes something, which is that you're missing something. And it's not about, the goal is not agreement. The goal is merely understanding. What we tend to do across deep divides where there's suspicion and mistrust is we'll create certainties around things like they're crazy, they're stupid, they're evil. Notice when you begin to tell yourself that. Oh, they're just dumb. Really? I don't know. I don't think that's true. Like, what am I missing? What am I missing? It's sort of like, why would a good person believe this? Right? So remember that, keep that in mind, because we're so pushed to these sort of drastic and untrue beliefs that are pulling us away from each other. Another strategy is to ask how and not why. When you are in a conversation and it is across a big divide, you're going to be tempted to just ask questions of why. Why do you believe this? Why this? Why this? Why this? Why is a perfectly curious question, but across big divides, it can really kind of make people feel defensive very quickly and feel like they need to justify who they are and that they matter. They're going to put their guards up. They're going to give you reasons that others have taken shelter under, whatever they saw on cable news, whatever they saw in their favorite, commentary, whatever, the meme from social media. They're not going to give you their actual story. They're not going to explain the path they walk to their views. And that's what you really want. There's research that shows that people understand each other's moral, that people respect each other's morality better when it's explained in the form of a personal story. If you want to understand why I think the way I think about abortion, let me give you a sense of my journey through that, right? And when I share it that way, it's a lot easier to understand than it would be if I just give you the sort of logical reasons and that's all I give you. If you disagree with me, you'll give me your logical reasons, and then we'll just repeat those reasons to each other, except more and more loudly until it all blows up.
Sounds like part of what you're saying too is, how did you come to see it this way?
Yeah.
Tell me about your perspective. What happened? What's your story around this as to how it happened? And I think, that's such an insightful thing, that why is not necessarily a great question across a big divide, but to try to understand, how did you come to that conclusion? Mm-hmm. Tell me about what led you to this. There was something, you did some really, I think, interesting setup in your book where you talked about that we have a natural tendency as human beings to sort, mm-hmm. right? Sort for similarity, I guess you could say. And that sorting sometimes can lead to this whole phenomenon that you were just talking about of othering, where we start to ridicule or dehumanize or make the other less than. And that process of siloing, where now I'm only listening to information that agrees with what I've started to form as my opinion. And so the question Will was just asking, I think, really directly relates to that, because while this siloing, othering, or sorting, siloing, and othering is a natural phenomenon, it can actually get out of hand, and social media seems to really help us do that brilliantly.
It sure does.
And so this recipe for curiosity and to understand another person's perspective, for you, that seems like it's something you really hunger for. I think you actually said you're addicted to people's stories and to understand their perspectives. So how did you develop that? Where did that come from?
Yeah, it was a bit of a surprise, honestly. I was sharing the story earlier. I took one of those sort of career choice tests in school where, somebody analyzes your answers and says, oh, this is a career you should pursue and this one you shouldn't. And I remember that I had put like, oh, maybe I'm interested in communications. And the test folks had been like, we don't think you should do that. You don't have a lot of people skills. You're pretty shy. And so I almost took it as a dare. I was like, oh, you just watch. But I grew up pretty kind of shy and a little bit maybe awkward. And I didn't want to talk to people. But something about journalism pulled me in anyway. I think writing. I loved writing. I loved telling stories. And my very first journalism internship, those two things clashed. And the fascination with people's stories won, and slowly led me to force myself to practice being in conversation with people. Sometimes really, really uncomfortable conversations. I was a police reporter, like that sort of thing, where you have to call the relative of someone who, has died or something like that to get a quote and comment. It was that kind of thing that I did not enjoy. But what I did enjoy was all the stories that I did. And I did a lot of them that were, profiles or features, or just here's this person who's noteworthy in their community for one or another reason. And I just wanted to know, why did they do this and not somebody else? And I have this deep down conviction out of all those experiences that everyone is interesting. Everyone. I remember one time I was at this college event years ago, and a student, we were going around introducing each other in a little kind of mingly circle. And the student was like, I'm not very interesting. And I was like, I was horrified. And I just wanted to prove her wrong. You are. We're all so fascinating and full of surprises. So it was discovering what bottomless mysteries people really are. Just as soon as you start asking questions and question your own assumptions, because you can't ask genuine questions of other people if you think you already know them or you have them figured out. That's one of the silliest things we do to each other.
Go ahead, Will.
Monica, you just reminded me of a great scene from Monty Python's Life of Brian. I don't know if you ever saw that, but he's standing on the balcony and telling everybody that they're all unique. And they repeat, we are all unique. And then one guy says, I'm not. And they look at him and they go, yeah, he's not. I just couldn't resist recalling that scene, one of my favorites. But you also reminded me, I think it was John Steinbeck, who said that we tell stories so that we don't feel so alone, because our stories bring us together. As we know, there are stories and then there are stories. And the ones that achieve that have emotion to them. And so I've got a question for you about head and heart, because I'm a ravenous communication junkie. I love podcasts. I love reading. I'm always tapping into communication. Increasingly, I'm concerned that a lot of us are in our heads. We're really stuck in our heads. I was actually, and I'm going to do this, I was going to get the tape measure and measure the distance from the center of my head to the center of my heart, because I think that can be the most perilous journey, to get out of our heads into our hearts, to get vulnerable, not to think we're the smartest person in the room, and to share heart to heart rather than brain to brain.
Absolutely right. absolutely right. And you brought up earlier the internet, social media, these spaces that we designed to connect us, they do tend to put us into our own heads. I mean, one example of that is, I'm here. I think our listeners are hearing us probably on audio, but I'm seeing your faces on Zoom. And as I speak, I get to see you sometimes nodding, sometimes smiling, maybe a grimace here or there. I'm getting feedback about, is this making sense? Like, is what I'm saying connecting at all? When I'm writing on Facebook or Instagram, I don't get any of that feedback. While I'm writing, I don't know how people are going to react. And then when I hit publish, a very small percentage of people who are reading what I wrote are going to take an action like liking the post or something or leaving a comment. So that leads me to imagine people's reaction because I don't see it. I don't witness the listening. And what do we do when we imagine people's reactions? Well, our insecurities tend to come out. That's where we get our cues. So yeah, we get feedback from projections of real people, and we use that to decide what we say. And so that's just, it removes the human element, and it does keep us a lot in our heads. We're PR representatives for ourselves and trying to anticipate whatever misunderstanding is going to come out. And it makes it all a very treacherous place. We started this conversation talking about how treacherous it can feel just to share what you think. And we're in spaces that are not very forgiving, that are not very messy. In live conversation, I can say, oh, that came out wrong, and I might laugh and you might laugh in response and there's a forgiveness. But you can't, that's a lot harder, right? Someone who is already suspicious of you can take whatever you said and go, see, and it doesn't matter how you meant it.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things we consult with a lot of corporations and do coaching with executives and so on. And one of the things we encourage them to do for them is a lot of times around texting, right? As the text gets sent out and somebody reads an emotion or a tone into it that wasn't there. And so rather than going, hey, I'm not sure I understood this, a lot of times it goes straight to accusation and escalation. Right? So we've tried to encourage our clients to adopt a real simple rule. As soon as there's a misunderstanding, the writing stops, whether it's email or text, and you either get on the phone or get on Zoom or walk down the hall and engage in a face-to-face conversation for all the reasons you just described.
Yeah.
And so there's another thing you said. You were talking about the person who thought they weren't interesting and how that intrigued you in a way, almost like you wanted to prove them wrong.
They proved that they were interesting by saying that they weren't interesting.
Yeah, and I remember I learned. That's great. That's a good twist. I learned something from somebody. I was in a group and people were sharing, and there was this one young woman who was shy, I think, and maybe just didn't have the best self-esteem, and it came around to her to share, and she said exactly that. Oh, I really don't have much to say. I'm not very interesting. And I remember one of the other people in the group said, well, that may be the way you feel, but tell me something you're really passionate about. And it was such a great thing. You saw her all of a sudden light up, and she went, what do you mean? We said, what is it that fascinates you? What do you love to think about or do? And she launched into this whole thing about one of the most fascinating topics anybody had brought up in the whole sharing. And afterwards, it turned out that we were all just like, first of all, blown away. But secondly, I thought, what a great question.
That is a great question. Yeah, I love that. It's a tip I think about too. When people are confounded by, and a sense that, and this happens a lot across the political divide, that other group, those other people are motivated by something they hate. And a good way to get curious past that judgment is to get curious about what they love. There's an author named Valerie Kaur who I quote constantly because she said, anger is a force that protects that which is loved. So usually anger gives people a reason to think that they should stop the conversation. And often that might be what's happening. Something's burning, there's heat, and heat can cook something, but nope, something's burning. It's time to go, time to take a break. Fine. But a lot of times, anger is people's passion on display. And it may come in a really hostile format, that might be too hot or not. But you can see it that way, and you can ask yourself, well, instead of me presuming that this anger is because they hate something, they hate me, they hate what I think. No, let me ask them about what they love. Let me get curious. What is it they're trying to protect? Because when we want change, or we don't want change, either way, one of the most important questions is, what do we want to stay the same?
Yeah. Well, before we conclude the program, we've still got a little bit of time. We do want to mention your book, I Never Thought of It That Way, Mónica Guzmán, and encourage our listeners to pick up a copy. Great book. And just, pronouncing that title reminds me of what you said earlier, which I'd love to go another layer down on, the question, what am I missing? Because it's a great question, but it's also something that we could pay lip service to. Oh, there's a good technique. What am I missing? You get an answer, and then you charge ahead with your own agenda again.
Yeah.
But I think, when I've applied that in my own language, it's what am I missing? Then what else am I missing?
Yeah.
So that it goes deeper. And then what else am I missing? So it becomes kind of a perpetual stance that there's probably always something that I'm missing. And curiosity is not something to trot out as a technique. It's a state of being. It's
That's
just
right.
persistent.
There's no time that you are done being curious. It's like, okay, when you're studying for a test and you have to learn a certain amount of knowledge to get the A. Okay, there's a time when you can say, I know enough, right? I've been married to my husband 12 years. I'm not done asking him questions about who he is, because he's a person and people are infinite. And so curiosity never ends. And there is always something you're missing because you're not that person. And, but you'll still get to a stopping point where it's like, I get it enough. Maybe I've satisfied, but I feel like I've come to a place of understanding that's good enough. But if you've only come to a place of judgment, then especially if that judgment is of a dehumanizing sort, right? Where you feel that person is just bad. Then if you do still want the goal to be understanding, stay curious.
That's beautiful. I think one of the processes we use in one of our apps that we use with our clients, there's a question we encourage people to ask is, I wonder what's going on behind the scenes for them. Again, that's that, what am I missing? And to be able to invite people to, like you said, to share what's important to you. What is it that you're really longing for? And then as they share, again, to let go of the need to agree or disagree, and just to thank them for having the willingness to share and be open about it. I am intrigued by something you got yourself involved in called Braver Angels, I think is the organization.
Great name.
And I'm curious how that sounds like in a very practical way plays into this whole approach that you're talking about. Can you share a little bit with us about that organization?
Yeah, so I'm on the national leadership team of Braver Angels, and that's the nation's largest cross-partisan grassroots nonprofit dedicated to political depolarization. The idea being not that we're out to change people's views on the issues, we're out to help people change their views about each other. Because what we see in the research, there's this thing called affective polarization. Affective polarization is the political polarization that happens because of how we feel about the other side. And that feeling, that animosity makes us so vulnerable to misperceptions. And so there's lots of research about this too, that when one side is asked to describe or guess at the feelings and the beliefs on the other side, both sides will wildly exaggerate. Because that's the world we live in, a very sorted, othering and siloed world where we get these signals and they lead us to think ill of each other to the point that we skew each other past the point of reality. As long as we do that, it's difficult to see the world as it is. It's difficult to see our divisions for what they really are. So Braver Angels started back after the 2016 election, and it was based on marriage therapy, methods from marriage therapy. So the analogy being Democrats and Republicans are on the brink, much like a couple on the brink of divorce. So Yeah, one of our co-founders, Bill Doherty, is a renowned marriage therapist. And we have more than 50 programs, workshops, skills trainings, where people come together and are taken through structures that train them in everything from, we have a workshop called Depolarizing Within, looking inside at your own assumptions that might be getting in the way of you seeing other beliefs and other people for who they really are. Skills for when your family is divided by politics, understanding the roles that different family members play and how to disrupt those roles a little bit so that folks can really see and listen to each other, even past their expectations of each other, which is a big thing for families, and on and on and on. So yeah, Braver Angels has been doing incredible work. I'm really proud to be, I can't think of a better place to have my feet, planted in some ways, because I am working every single day with liberals and conservatives and libertarians and, folks in the middle. And I'm challenged every single day. I mean, friction is added to my worldview every day. And it's a unique experience and it's awesome. And we're all united. Like, I work alongside folks of very different political persuasions, and we're all united in this mission to make sure that America can march forward and can deliberate and can make smart decisions together and doesn't become blind, because that's where we are when we're so divided. We're blinded. We can't see the world as it is.
Yeah. My wife has where when something is expressed by an her, it hooks it and brings it back to herself. So it seems to be about the other person. It's actually about me.
Yes.
So what is happening in this interaction that's triggered something in me?
I love that.
And when I do that, what I've noticed, because I've done a lot of work with people in one way or another, when I face something in myself, usually triggered by somebody else, when I face it, really deal with it and clear it in the sense that it's not really bugging me anymore, life brings me people who are dealing with that issue. Yeah. Because I now am in a position of kind of mentoring, not as a, I know it all, I'm there, but I've been through it. I've dealt with this. So now I feel a little more prepared to help you. I can understand what you're going through and I'm not getting triggered.
Yes. Isn't that great? There's a quote from the Talmud, and I think there's versions of it all over the place in spiritual traditions and social, all over the place. But it's, things are not as they are. Things are as we are. So the lens through which you see things is everything. So when we don't practice some awareness of that, and in this work, in Curiosity Across the Divides, I translate that to be aware of your own assumptions. Recognize that assumptions are certainty's minions. And when you're certain, you can't be curious, because when you think you know, you won't think to ask.
That is so. I mean, I think there's such an important dynamic right there. It's seemingly simple, but it's actually really profound. And I remember one time I was so frustrated with this one person. I was young, was probably 12 or something like that, and I was complaining about them to my grandmother about they think they're so right and they're wrong and so on. And she said something almost like what you just quoted. She said, "Dear, just remember that what you see is who you are right now."
Right.
So if you need to see differently, you might want to change the way you're looking at it, because your lens seems to be affecting your vision.
Exactly.
And I was like, what? But I stuck with me my whole life. I mean, it was really a profound moment.
That's awesome. That's so great that you remember that moment. The reason my book is titled "I Never Thought of It That Way" is precisely because of the power of a reframe, of being able to look at something from a fresh angle. It can be a completely transformative moment within yourself, one that you are happily along on the ride for, right? And if the goal being, if we can give each other more "I never thought of it that way" moments, what we do is we complexify each other's simplicities. It's like we all have, by virtue of sharing our view of the world, we gift each other a more multi-layered and true version of the world we share. And that really has to be the goal in a lot of ways. That's what the splintering and fracturing is keeping us from doing.
Well, do you have any really practical tips for kind of opening a stuck situation. Because I think probably a lot of the time in our friendships, family, we're dealing, I mean, you've had some serious, headbutting to deal with, I do too, but for the most part, I think we attract people that we enjoy, we love, we hang out, communication is fun. But when you get in a, head to head, arms crossed, positions locked situation, give us a few thoughts on how you deal with that. How do you open things up?
Yeah. I mean, one thing is if it's really stuck an arms crossed situation, it's probably a good idea to take a break. Whether it's just, I'm going to get a glass of water or change topics for a minute. So one important thing is, the best conversation is the one that can lead to another conversation. You don't need to resolve anything all at once. A lot of us think we do, and we start getting upset in a conversation mostly because they're not satisfying us on our terms, on our timetable, but understanding someone can take a little time. So there's a mindset shift there. The other thing I see is people sometimes are stuck not within the conversation, but they feel that they can't even start it. They don't know how, they're too scared. There's someone maybe in their family or in their circle that, they feel like they ought to be able to talk to and they can't. In that case, sometimes the step people skip is when they ask if they can have this conversation, be really humble and honest about any past behaviors that you have had that have not been that productive for the conversation. So, you might say, hey, Uncle Bob, I know that in the past, when we've talked about some political things, and, Uncle Bob's looking grim as you say this. I know, I have a terrible tendency to interrupt and finish your sentences. This is something I do. And, that's been really bad. And I've realized that hasn't let me actually understand you and listen to you long enough, to really get there. So if you're up for it, I want to treat you to coffee, or, let's hang. And I'm actually really curious what you think about this one thing. And I'm going to work to really, really hear you out on it. So it's that step. If you feel that you've burned a little bit of the bridge, there's a way to repair it. And it usually means not coming in and saying, I feel like we can talk about this, but can you be just less whiny, but you need to change. I'm fine. It's you who needs to change before we can have this conversation. Don't do that.
Yeah, that's a great model. Can
I just, Chris, can I just mention this? This cartoon, Ashley Brilliant, is one of my favorite cartoonists. And he's got one cartoon where the person says, the fact that I've accepted you as you are doesn't mean that I've given up hope you might not still change.
Right. That's a good point. That's actually a nice kind of Zen-like way to approach these conversations too, because once if you are driven to change the person, then you make it impossible to understand them. Yeah. If all you want is for that person to change, then that person feels like you're not accepting anything about who they are, and can't give you that path that they've walked to who they are, because they don't trust you with that path, because you're not accepting them. You're rejecting them at every turn. So you're not on a path to understanding. You're on a path to an unhealthy conflict.
Yeah, and convincing it goes back to that simple quote of St. Francis: seek first to understand, right, and then be understood. And it's
exactly,
I think such a simple saying, but so profound. As we get ready to wrap it up here, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time. It's been rich and wonderful. I love your insights and just your whole take on this. Just wanted to share one story you talked about in your book. It's a quote that I had long since forgotten about, that you brought up by Alfred P. Sloan. Mm-hmm. And I wondered if you'd share that story and what you gleaned from that, because I thought that was such a brilliant moment.
I love this story so much. It's one of the points of evidence that the business world understands the need to work across differences better than almost anyone, because profit is involved. So this is Alfred P. Sloan, the former CEO of General Motors, and he was heading up a meeting of one of his top committees, and he looks around the room and he says, okay, I take it we're all in agreement on this issue, something they were talking about, and all these heads nod, and he goes, okay, then we're going to table this discussion until next time to give you all time to develop disagreement so we can see what this decision is really about. And that really sums it up, because if there's too much agreement on something complicated, chances are you're not seeing it for what it is. And you may not make good decisions about it. And I feel like our meme culture on social media does that all the time. Oversimplifies in a cool rhetorical way that seems like such a slam dunk and isn't. And is just pulling people away from what's really there.
Yeah, there's so much research on that too now, of course, around the value of diversity in decision making, and how diverse groups are, significantly outperform homogeneous groups in terms of accurate decisions and prognostications. And this just points to it. And his comment was such a brilliant leadership move, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. And you know what? Like, it's great to have diverse teams, but if they can't share the products of their diverse thinking, you may as well not have a diverse team. So the culture matters, and you have to have a curious culture.
Curious culture that creates safety for differing points of view. Absolutely.
Exactly.
And without that, inclusion is just a word, not an actual process.
Right.
I learned something important the other day, talking with someone about communication, and we were agreeing how important it was to listen. And this person said, yeah, I'm really learning how to listen to someone when they're not speaking. And I found that was very profound, because, of course, we're hearing on many levels, not just body language, but we feel it. We feel when someone is maybe feeling a little alienated. And I think I'll remember that a long time. Am I listening to people who are not speaking? Am I really still seeing and being with them?
That's so wonderful. And that reminds us that there are contexts where that listening is possible, and there are contexts where it is not. On the internet, not easy. Over text, impossible. But when you see each other, hear each other, and dwell in the silences together, that's different.
I think you said something about in your book that music is what happens between the notes.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what we're talking about here. Yeah. So again, thank you so much. We'll put up the information about your book, about Braver Angels, and where people can find you. But we so genuinely appreciate the time you've taken with us today, and looking forward, we'll send the link out to you so you can enjoy the conversation back again.
Yeah, no, I'll be excited to share it. Thank you both so much. This was really great.